Now let's take you to Italy, where the international community will gather for a two-day conference seeking to draft a peace deal for Libya. The conference in Palermo is expected to host high-level delegations from Turkey, the Gulf countries and the European Union. It comes as an initiative to hold elections in the North African country in December failed. Well, let's go live now to our correspondent Giorgia Orlandi, who's in Palermo. Good morning to you, Giorgia. Now, this is an ambitious summit. Just explain to us, what's it hoping to achieve?
Well, this conference is the result of great efforts by the Italian government. Italy sees Libya as the main place of its sphere of influence in the whole Mediterranean. And relations between the two countries, go back to the 20th century when Libya was an Italian colony for about 30 years. Now, the aim of this conference is to bring together opposing forces that are part of this very complex scenario in a very much divided country between different military groups, a country that has been devastated by years of violence after 2011, after that UN military operation that overthrew Gaddafi. Now, of course, despite all these efforts to bring here all these international and local stakeholders, it seems that many of these leaders won't probably show up, including General Haftar, the man who controls most of the part of eastern Libya, but also EU leaders, Macron and Merkel, won't be here. They're sending their delegation, but also Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump. According to some Libyan parties, of course, they feel that they are underrepresented, and some analysts say that this summit won't probably be as successful as it's not inclusive of all the parts that are involved in the present situation in Libya.
All right, well, despite that, Giorgia, what can we expect from today? What's on the programme?
So main heads of the main delegations will arrive here in Palermo at around 7 p.m. They will meet Prime Minister Conte. It's going to be followed by a welcome dinner, and then meetings will resume tomorrow morning, and there will be a press conference given by Prime Minister Conte tomorrow. Now, very tight security measures here in Palermo. 3,000 police officers have been deployed, and an area of 3 kilometers is actually a cordon off here in Palermo. Bell.
All right, thank you very much, Giorgia Orlandi there in Palermo. World Chess Championship is a €1 million contest, but that's not all that's at stake. History is waiting for either Magnus Carlsen or Fabiano Caruana to claim victory. Carlsen is 27 years old and he's won the last 3 championships. He's a part-time model who's already seen as the rock star of the chess world. His challenger, Fabiano Caruana, is 26 and he's hoping to be the first American to grab the title since Bobby Fischer back in 1972. The two men are tied after 2 games and have a maximum of 10 left. One of them will wear the crown before the competition closes on the 26th of November. Well, let's go live now to the journalist Jørund Vessel Carlsen, who's joining us to talk a little bit more about this. Good morning to you, Mr. Carlsen. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme this morning. Just start by telling us why this is such an exciting championship. I mean, we've seen many chess championships pass without this level of media attention.
Well, this is the world's #1, Magnus Carlsen, against the world's #2, Fabiano Caruana. It's only 3 rating points between them now in the world rating, and this is Carlsen's toughest opponent ever as in the World Championships. So in the first 3 World Championships, Carlsen was expecting to win, but now it's really wide open.
And just talk to us a little bit more about these players. Are they, we've got a 26-year-old, a 27-year-old, one is a part-time model. Are they, do you think, going to be able to make chess, in the mainstream sense, a cool game?
Magnus Carlsen is actually a normal guy, so he's trying to make chess mainstream in Norway, and the Norwegians followed him since he was 12. So he's a big idol in Norway. So that's making young people starting to play chess. And I think Fabiano Caruana is trying to do the same in the US. And Magnus said it very well in a press conference. He said that for me, chess has always been the coolest thing in the world.
Does chess have a bit of a problem with this, though? Because a lot of, if you're covering a television match on television, it is essentially a lot of thinking. Does it struggle, therefore, to be as exciting as a game of tennis or football?
Yes, of course. The first match were about 7 hours, so of course it's a little bit longer than a tennis match. But Magnus is trying to make this more popular in Norway by using heart rate monitors and giving live interviews. So it's maybe a little revolution on making chess popular both by youngsters and on TV shows.
And just one last question. I mean, I will preface this by saying you are Norwegian, so I think we know where your loyalties lie, but who would you predict to be the winner?
The first two matches ended as a draw, so it's really hard to say. But both me and the bookmakers are having Carlsen as a little favorite, so I have to say Carlsen, but it's not going to be easy.
We had the first day of that peace forum yesterday, now entering its second day. What has been discussed thus far?
Well, the message at that day one of the Paris Peace Forum really seemed to echo the words by France's wartime leader, Georges Clemenceau, who spoke about the fact that it is easier to make war than peace. What we saw unfold in that event really was a sequence of impassioned pleas for global cooperation, for working together to tackle some of the most pressing crises facing the world at the moment, for valuing international institutions such as the United Nations. The French president delivered a surprisingly brief address and then invited the German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to open the forum. Merkel spoke about the importance, or highlighted or warned against isolationism, saying it didn't work 100 years ago. Why would it work in today's interconnected world? And Antonio Guterres invited other world leaders to strengthen international cooperation to face the threats and tests of today and tomorrow. So it was really all about strengthening international cooperation, strengthening the foundations for lasting peace. And the vast majority of the 70 or so world leaders who came here to Paris to attend armistice commemorations attended the Paris Forum, the Paris Peace Forum, with, of course, the notable absence of the US President Donald Trump.
And is there any sense of why Donald Trump hasn't been there?
Well, Belle, speaking about international cooperation, praising international institutions that facilitate multilateralism is not exactly one of Donald Trump's priorities. He's been talking about putting America first. It's unclear whether this was a part of his plan when he announced he would come to Paris earlier this year for the military parade. He never spoke about staying longer for this forum. He was criticized for not attending a memorial on Saturday because of the weather, and he did instead go to an American cemetery on Sunday, the cemetery of Suresnes, to honor the memory of some 1,500 U.S. servicemen who are buried there. And after that, he traveled back to Washington, D.C.
And Annelies, over the weekend, there were comments from world leaders like Macron, like Merkel, that seemed to contain veiled criticisms of far-right ideologies. Has there been diplomatic reaction to that rhetoric?
Well, it was really interesting because even though the focus this weekend really was about what brings all these nations together, every single speech, Belle, seemed to talk about some of the differences between these nations. The Russian president, Vladimir Putin, had some interesting things to say about some remarks made by the French president, Emmanuel Macron, earlier in the week. Macron, who had been highlighting the importance of not taking peace for granted, also called on the creation of a real
European army to defend the blocs against certain threats. Take a listen to what the Russian president had to say about Emmanuel Macron's plans.
To alternative European military forces, it's not a new idea. President Macron has revived it now, but I was told about it by one of the previous French presidents, Jacques Chirac. Actually, Europe is a great economic power, a great economic union, so it's quite natural that they want to be independent, self-reliant and sovereign in the sphere of defence and security. I think that this process is positive on the whole from the point of view of strengthening the multipolar nature of the world. In this regard, our position coincides with that of France.
In that regard, their position coincides with France, but clearly some differences were also present here in France this weekend, and perhaps that one image that is going to stay in people's minds, that solemn walk up the Champs-Élysées you see behind me of the world leaders all conveying then near the Arc de Triomphe. Some two very interesting absences in that walk were, of course, that of the US President Donald Trump and the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin.